Part 71. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 701. Chapter 701 must be strictly investigated. Mrs. Joe's wife and Mrs. Han's wife were stunned, so surprised that they couldn't even speak. The third prince's concubine was pregnant, but unfortunately the child was not born. So, is Han Jingchen's child the emperor's eldest grandson? Mrs. Han's tears just flowed out. The sixth prince has always been ignored without his mother and concubines. Now that his daughter has the emperor's eldest grandson, she can at least stand upright among all the princes and concubines. She can finally stand upright among all the princes and concubines. I can rest assured. Mrs. Joe's family was naturally happy. Seeing Mrs. Han's family still standing outside the door, she quickly urged her to enter the house. The smell of blood in the room has not dissipated. Han Jingchen was lying on the bed with disheveled hair. When he saw his mother's face, tears flowed down uncontrollably. Mrs. Han's wife hurriedly walked over and took her daughter's hand to greet her. Mrs. Joe's family was very knowledgeable and quickly walked to Fan Kinjao to look after the child. It's just that the child kept crying, and even until he cried purple, he didn't show any signs of stopping. Fan Kinjao explained softly, "My brother's collarbone was broken, that's why he kept crying, but there's no need to worry too much. Children have very strong healing abilities and they will heal on their own slowly." Mrs. Joe. The collarbone is broken, is it okay? Han Jingchen was afraid that Mrs. Joe had misunderstood Fan Kinjao, so she quickly said weakly, "The child is too big and can't get out." If Kinjao hadn't reacted quickly and broke the child's collarbone, I'm afraid that I just can't see my mother anymore. Mrs. Han's wife quickly wiped her daughter's tears and said, "Stop crying now. If you cry during the confinement period, you will get sick." Mrs. Joe's wife looked at Han Jingchen in shock, unable to recover for a long time. After 10 months of pregnancy, who wouldn't feel distressed by the flesh falling out of his body? Mrs. Joe's wife is also a mother. Of course she knows that the sixth prince's concubine does not care about her child, but she can still say these words so firmly even if she feels distressed, which shows how much she trusts the crown princess. This is some kind of fairy friendship, even she is envious of it. Looking at His Highness the Crown Prince outside the door, who was still helping to arrange important and minor affairs, Mrs. Joe's family suddenly felt that the Joe family's decision to side with the Crown Prince was the wisest choice. Han Jingchen was too weak during childbirth and fell asleep within a short time. Fan Kinjao handed the baby to the wet nurse, carefully gave instructions on what needed attention, and then walked out of the delivery room. In the yard, there is a man standing under the plum tree with his hands behind his back. Under the night, those dark eyes were as still water, just looking in her direction quietly. The moment he caught her, a familiar smile appeared on his handsome face. Fan Kinjao just stood there and waiting for him to walk in her direction. The cool breeze blew the snow-white clothes, as if peach blossoms were falling, which made him more elegant and refined. Bailey Fengming stood at the foot of the steps and stretched out his hand towards her. "Let's go." Fan Kinjao handed over his hand and noticed the coldness in his palm. "No need to wait for me." Bailey Fengming smiled, held her hand, and carefully watched the steps under her feet. He waited until she was safely standing beside him before saying softly, "I will wait for my wife. It is only natural." Fan Kinjao twitched the corners of his lips and said, "Glib tongue." Bailey Fengming accepted it happily, took her hand and walked out of the house together. Mrs. Joe, who was belatedly aware of the situation, hurriedly chased them out. She originally wanted to see off the Crown Prince and Crown Princess in person, but in the end she saw the two figures covered in stars and moonlight, holding hands and walking towards the distance leaning on each other. Mrs. Joe. This dog food really caught me off guard. Mrs. Joe. A midwife walked over tremblingly. Mrs. Joe frowned and said, "If you have anything to do, just tell me." The midwife suddenly knelt in front of Mrs. Joe's family. "I was originally here to deliver the baby to the sixth prince. Everything was fine. But unexpectedly, the princess suddenly burst into the door and threatened to break my brother's collarbone. The servant tried his best to stop him, but was forced out by the princess." Mrs. Joe's heart skipped a beat. "You mean, the crown princess did it on purpose?" The midwife lowered her head and said, "If the crown princess hadn't suddenly appeared, the sixth prince and princess would have been safe, mother and child." Mrs. Joe's wife silently looked back at Mrs. Han's family, who was still taking care of Han Jingchen in the room. Then she withdrew her eyes and fell on the midwife again. "The sixth prince's mansion is very lucky to find such a loyal servant like you. A slave doesn't dare to be a slave just tells the truth." Mrs. Joe family smiled. "In this case, I will reward you well on behalf of the sixth prince. Come on. Drag this slave who intends to slander the crown princess to me and beat him to death." The midwife, who had shown a hint of surprise just now, was only surprised when she heard these words. Seeing the little boy follow the sound into the yard, the midwife looked at Mrs. Joe in panic. Mrs. Joe's servant is telling the truth. She is really the crown princess. How brave! You actually slandered the current crown princess. Come here, give me a good beating. Madame Joe's face was as steely as she asked the servant to hold her down in the yard and beat her. Soon, the midwife's heart-rending wails could be heard in the yard. Mrs. Joe's wife stood on the steps with no expression on her face, but in fact, her heart was already filled with huge waves. It was surprising that the crown princess asked to break the child's collarbone, but she believed that with the crown princess's personality, it was absolutely impossible to harm the sixth prince's concubine. Moreover, the Joe family is now in the crown prince's boat. Even her son will marry the crown prince's sister next year. To put it bluntly, if something happens to the crown princess, the Joe family will not be able to survive alone. She is just a little midwife. Do you really dare to slander the current crown princess just to claim credit? The more Mrs. Joe thought about it, the more frightened she became. She broke out in a cold sweat all over her body. Madame Han's wife, who was inside, heard the commotion and came out. When Madame Joe's wife said this, her face turned ugly. The sixth prince's concubine has no mother concubine, and now the sixth prince's concubine has just given birth, so I have nothing to do. It's better to stay a little longer. If you want to get to the bottom of this matter, don't rush it." Mrs. Joe nodded. "I'll bother Mrs. Han now." Mrs. Han's wife smiled and said, "It should be. Mrs. Han is Han Jingchen's natal mother, so it is reasonable for her to stay and take care of her daughter's confinement." After sending away Mrs. Joe's wife, Mrs. Han's family arrested the remaining midwives overnight. This time the person who fell into the daughter's belly was the emperor's eldest grandson. If someone really deliberately made a fuss about this matter, intending to slander the crown prince for murdering the emperor's eldest grandson, it would be a big deal. This matter must be investigated to the end. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 702. Chapter 702. I don't like you like that. Fan Qingjiao's nerves have been tense ever since he received the post from the sixth prince's mansion. Now that he got on the carriage, he began to feel drowsy. Bailey Fengming looked at Fan Qingjiao's upper and lower eyelids fighting, stretched out his hands to pull her into his arms, and gently rubbed her delicate cheek with his thin lips. "Go to sleep, I'll stay with you." Fan Qingjiao nodded drowsily, his consciousness having already begun to settle. It wasn't too cold in the carriage, but Bailey Fengming was still worried that the person in his arms would catch cold. Seeing that the person was asleep, he shook off his cloak and hugged them together. Fan Qingjiao could feel a steady flow of warmth flowing into her body, but her limbs were still cold. She had a dream, a dream that had no clue. In the dream, she was floating in mid-air, surrounded by blood mist and filled with harsh and sharp screams. Fan Kinjao wanted to walk out of here, but no matter how hard she tried, her body didn't respond at all. Just when she was at a loss, the blood mist in front of her eyes was suddenly slowly dispersed. Bailey Fengming was walking towards her direction step by step, walking on the river of blood. Fan Kinjao looked at that familiar face. It still looked as handsome as in his memory, but it seemed so strange at the moment. His fair face was spattered with dazzling blood, and even his dark eyes were soaked in blood. He was holding a long sword in his slender beautiful hands, and he was obviously smiling, but it was 3 points more miserable than crying. Standing in front of her, he whispered, "I'm sorry, I'm late." Suddenly, he clenched the sword in his hand and swept towards her. The surrounding blood mist dispersed, and Fan Kinjao actually saw her deep inside the palace. Fires shot into the sky, and the sound of killing was sharp and harsh. Fan Kinjao's consciousness began to become blurred, and even everything in front of him began to become distorted. A pair of arms suddenly held her in his arms. At the moment when her consciousness was withdrawn, he buried his head in her ears and said, "If there is an afterlife, I will not be too late. Ayeo, wait for me. This I will definitely find you first." Fan Kinjao opened his eyes suddenly and broke into a cold sweat. "Are you having a nightmare?" My ears were itching, and the sound of Bailey Fengming flowed into my ears. Fan Kinjao then realized that he was being held in Bailey Fengming's arms, and the carriage beneath him had already stopped bumping. Have I been asleep for a long time? Fan Kinjao found out that it was a dream and relaxed into Bailey Fengming's arms again. Bailey Fengming kissed her smooth forehead and said, 2 hours. 2 hours. So you've already arrived at Hua's house? Fan Kinjao stretched out his hand to lift the lathe curtain, and sure enough he saw the gate of the western suburbs mansion standing in the dark night. "Why didn't you wake me up earlier?" Fan Kinjao looked up at the handsome young man beside him. "I want to stay with you for a while." Bailey Fengming smiled faintly, not mentioning the word pampering, but everything he said was related to pampering. Fan Kinjao didn't know that he couldn't bear to wake her up. "What dream did you have that made you so panicked?" Bailey Fengming looked at her funny. Fan Kinjao didn't intend to hide anything, he just repeated the dream just now, and suddenly looked at this handsome face. "Bailey Fengming, such killing should not belong to you." Bailey Fengming raised his eyebrows and was startled. Fan Kinjao slowly raised his hand and gently traced his three-dimensional and exquisite facial features. "You look scary in that way. You have no emotions but killing. I don't like it. I still like you now." Before I could finish speaking, my lips were blocked. The warm breath hit my face, itching. I don't know how long it took before Bailey Fengming returned her lips to hers. Looking at her flushed cheeks, he chuckled and said, "Do you like me like this?" Fan Kinjao, stinky gangster. Looking at Fan Kinjao's speechless appearance, the smile on Bailey Fengming's face deepened. He rubbed the top of her hair and kissed her lips again, but this time he just touched her lips. "It turns out that my Ayeo is also childish and trapped in dreams." Fan Kinjao frowned. "Isn't it normal for dreams to affect your mood? Everyone will have it." Bailey Fengming said with a smile, "Others may be normal, but my Ayeo is resolute and invincible. I originally thought that you who look like this have already become an immortal. Now it seems that my Ayeo is also an immortal as a mortal. That's fine, my pressure won't be that great." "What's the meaning?" "Madam is too good. If I don't work harder, I will look incompetent." Fan Kinjao. It's really impossible to have a pleasant conversation today. But when it came to business, Fan Kinjao frowned and said, "Since the third prince was grounded last time, there hasn't been much movement. Is there any action from concubine Yu?" Bailey Fengming shook his head. "The Queen Mother never said it. Come to think of it, she didn't. Even concubine Yu fell silent, making Fan Kinjao even more confused. After all, in her understanding of the mother and son, they were not people who would give up easily. This time the third prince was banned, which may be a big blow to the third prince and his party, but with Bailey Wrong's character, I am afraid that he will have to work harder to find a way out. It's just that everything now has deviated from the previous life. Even Fan Kinjao is not sure what Bailey Wrongs will do next, so he can only tell Bailey Fengming to be careful. I received a letter from Lao Wu today. Everything is going well in Sub A. I should be able to come back next month, Bailey Fengming said softly. Fan Kinjao nodded, this is good news. When others want to stand out, they only want to add chips to themselves. But Bailey Fengming went in the opposite direction and kept adding brilliance to the people around him. On the surface it seems incomprehensible, but in fact it spreads the risks equally. It's like the fifth prince who has made great contributions to Sub A this time will definitely be promoted to a higher position. In this way, if Bailey Fengming is really imprisoned in the future, the fifth prince who is already able to take charge of his own affairs will definitely be able to help him. A helping hand. And if someone wants to target the fifth prince to suppress the prince's party, they will ignore Bailey Fengming. Even if those people really try their best to pull the fifth prince off his horse, I'm afraid they won't have the extra energy to scheme against Bailey Feng. Ringed. It's getting late, go back to sleep. Bailey Fengming smiled and pinched her cheek. You too. Fan Kinjao nodded as he came to his senses, bent down and got out of the carriage. Bailey Fengming waited until he watched Fan Kinjao enter the mansion before ordering Lin Yi to drive away in a carriage. At this time, he who was sitting in the carriage had no smile on his face. A gust of cold wind rolled up the car curtains, and the bright moonlight shone on his handsome face, desolate and cold. In the silence, Bailey Fengming raised the corners of her lips like a smile but not a smile. At this moment, he was completely integrated with the man in Fan Kinjao's dream. Lin Yi. The subordinate is here. Turn around and go to Hyogyo Temple. Yes. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 703. Chapter 703. Princess Yunyu's sudden visit. The news that the sixth prince was happy to have the emperor's eldest grandson spread throughout the main city the next day. As the queen mother of all the princes in the harem, it is necessary for the empress to go to the emperor in person and tell the emperor the good news. At about noon, Baitu personally led the palace people, and blocked the door of the sixth prince's residence, and sent in all the gifts given by the emperor and the queen. Such a big movement alarmed all the high-ranking mansions in the main city. As soon as the people in the palace left, the ladies from all the families came over to congratulate him with smiles on their faces. Fan Kinjao asked Nanny Su to take a trip on his behalf, and the gift was a longevity lock inlaid with gold and jade. Han Jingchen didn't care so much and just hung the longevity lock around his son's neck. Everyone who came to congratulate them. This makes people more deadly than others. They hurried over in a hurry, saying all they could to say good things, and their words were all thin, because they didn't have the dignity to take the longevity lock given by the princess. Fan Kinjao didn't go, simply because she wanted to avoid suspicion. The emperor had given rewards, and people from the royal family had to show up. Although she was not afraid of anything, instead of wasting time with those people, she would rather show them at home. Drying medicinal materials is even more relaxing. Su Yan returned quickly, thinking about Mrs. Han's advice, and hurriedly said the affairs of the little lady in the six princes' house a few days ago. Fan Kinjao. I didn't expect this episode at all. Ms. Han's wife said that the midwife left her breath that night just to continue the interrogation. Unexpectedly, she was fine at night, but she died the next day when someone was sent to go there. Others, the midwives, had no idea about this. Only one of them remembered that before the sixth prince's concubine gave birth, that midwife received a lot of money, and the family's son, who was over 30 years old, simply bought a young girl as his wife. Mrs. Han's wife and Mrs. son's family have been struggling for so long, and they have found out this matter. There is no other way, so they asked Aunt Sue to bring the news back, hoping to give the crown princess a warning. Fan Kinjao asked, "Did the sixth prince and concubine know about this?" Mrs. Fan Kinjao nodded and asked Nanny Sue to go out first. It would be best if Han Jingchen didn't know about this, otherwise she would have to blame herself a lot given her temperament. The sixth prince does not have a mother-in-law, and the midwives must have been introduced by familiar servants in the palace. As a wife of the inner house, she should be more aware of these things. Mrs. Sun and Han worked together and failed to find out anything. Even if she takes action again, it will be in vain. As for the death of the midwife, I'm afraid he was silenced. Fan Kinjao exhaled a long breath. Now that it has entered a fever pitch, this road will definitely become more difficult. Miss, someone is visiting and wants to invite you out for a walk. Ningan opened the curtain and entered the door, handing a post to Fan Kinjao. Fan Kinjao opened it and his eyebrows jumped. Princess Yunyu? Where is the person now? It's in the carriage at the door. Fan Kinjao. They didn't even get off the carriage, which clearly meant that she wasn't given any room to make a detour. Of course, Fan Kinjao knew that he did not have the dignity to let Princess Yunyu come to the door in person, but since she was already here, if she deliberately shied away, she would only lose the conversation. After simply cleaning up, Fan Kinjao left the yard. At the entrance of the mansion in the western suburbs, it was Yunyu who was sitting in the carriage when she heard the footsteps, raised her hand to lift the curtain, and saw Fan Kinjao walking this way. The sun was shining brightly, and Fan Kinjao's long plain dress rippled like water as she walked around. Her waterfall-like black hair was loosely tied behind her head, held in place only by a plum blossom. Although she had no other accessories on her body, but there is no sense of poverty and inferiority. On the contrary, the already agile facial features are highlighted. Fan Kinjao was like this, even Yunyu sitting in the carriage couldn't help but frown. Even she couldn't get enough of this face, let alone a man. Although Fan Swinning and Fan Kinjao, who are both members of the Fan family, have similar facial features, they are only limited to similarities. Fan Kinjao's elegant aura makes them faint as if they were born under the new moon. Two people don't even need to stand together to make a judgment in minutes. I have met Princess Yunyu. Fan Kinjao stood in front of the carriage and bowed first. Yunyu instantly returned to her original expression, with a smile on her face, and she was so affectionate. I didn't see the crown princess at the sixth prince's residence, so I was a little worried and came over to take a look. The weather happened to be nice today, so I thought of asking the crown princess to go out for a walk together. The princess will not be free, right? Fan Kinjao didn't go to Han Jingchen's place because he was on guard against unnecessary social interactions. As a result, this person blocked the door directly. Looking at the smile on Yunyu's face, Fan Kinjao thought that even if she said she was not free, Princess Yunyu would not let her go. This will disturb Princess Yunyu. What are you talking about, the princess? You should get in the car quickly. Fan Kinjao got on the carriage, and Yunyu asked the driver to continue driving, but before it had traveled far, it stopped again. Fan Kinjao looked out the car window. In front of him was the busiest main street in the main city. Princess Yunyu smiled and said, I have been back for such a long time, and I still haven't been able to go out for a walk today. I have accepted the love of the sixth prince and the princess for giving birth to the emperor's eldest grandson, so I can come out with the prince to get some fresh air. Fan Kinjao also smiled. Princess Yunyu shared the emperor's worries and took the initiative to go out to study medicine. Her filial piety is enough to move the world. Women like us who have been in Perda all year round cannot compare. Yunyu twitched the corner of her mouth. This was the first time she discovered that Fan Kinjao's mouth was not only able to attack people smoothly, but he could also flatter people with ease. At noon, the streets are lively. The doors of the shops on the main street were wide open, and the small merchants on both sides of the street were shouting vigorously. Fan Kinjao followed Princess Yunyu and walked among the crowd. Because both of them were wearing low-key clothes and the streets were crowded, no one recognized their identities. Just as we were walking, it became obvious that something was wrong. The shopkeepers standing at the door of the shop immediately ran into the shop when they saw Fan Kinjao. It didn't take long for the shopkeepers of each shop to come out. Yunyu was just curious when she saw Fan Kinjao next to her and gently shook her head at the shopkeepers. The shopkeepers who originally wanted to walk over immediately stopped. When Fan Kinjao passed by their shop, they all hurriedly led the waiters to clear the road in front of their shop. When Fan Kinjao and Yunyu's family walked past, there were still people passing by on both sides, but they obviously kept a certain distance from them. Yunyu said in confusion, "This is..." Fan Kinjao smiled and said, "These are the shops where my grandmother was married. Last year, I rented out all the shops. During the handover, I had some contacts with these shopkeepers. Is it really just correspondence?" Yunyu looked at Fan Kinjao blankly, unable to tell what she felt in her heart. The actions of these shopkeepers are clearly silently clearing the way for Fan Kinjao. In memory, the only people who can get the people to take the initiative to open the way are the father and the queen. Even a princess like her does not have this treatment. But now Fan Kinjao has done it. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 704. Chapter 704. What a coincidence. Fan Kinjao could see that Princess Yunyu's expression was a little bad, but she pretended not to see it. She couldn't refuse Princess Yunyu's invitation, but she didn't have to coax Yunyu to play the whole time. Fan Kinjao hoped that Yunyu would leave immediately as soon as she lost her temper, so as to save her from continuing to be pretentious and submissive. It's a pity that Princess Yunyu quickly regained her composure. I never expected that the crown princess is so powerful. Even I am ashamed of her ability. Not only does he have a smile on his face, but he can also pretend to be a sincere compliment. Fan Kinjao. This Princess Yunyu is really good at it. The two of them walked back and forth. Yunyu may have really not returned to the main city for a long time. Now everything she sees is strange. Fan Kinjao accompanies her in a good-tempered way, helping Yunyu give her opinions from time to time. If she doesn't know, those who were on the inside really thought they were sisters with a close relationship. But most of the time, Yunyu is looking at something, and Fan Kinjao is also watching. It can't be said that he likes it very much, he just passes the time. After all, anything he looks at is much more pleasing to the eye than Yunyu next to him. In the blink of an eye, Yunyu bought a lot of things. It has everything you need to eat, use and play. Looking back at Fan Kinjao, he was still as empty-handed as when he first arrived. I really bothered the crown princess today. Look at what I have in my hands. Look at the crown princess and didn't buy anything. If you didn't know better, you would have thought that the crown princess was just hanging out with me. I wonder what the crown princess saw. If you really like it and I bought it for the crown princess. Yunyu smiled. Princess Yunyu doesn't need to feel so guilty. If it weren't for Princess Yunyu, I wouldn't have planned to go out today. Fan Kinjao also laughed. Originally, she didn't care much about these external things. Yunyu. Being poor means being poor, and you are full of excuses. Yunyu didn't believe it, there really was nothing that could catch Fan Kinjao's eyes. However, Yunyu heard that since the husband of the Hua family died in Huaishang, even if the Hua family is completely in despair, it is estimated that it has not recovered now, otherwise as a default crown prince, she would not be like this. Money is tight. When passing by a restaurant, Princess Yunyu couldn't walk, Why don't we go in and have a rest? I'm the host today, so the crown princess must not be polite to me. Fan Kinjao subconsciously raised his head and saw the plaque of Yunzong Pavilion. This restaurant was newly opened not long ago, but because of its novel and poetic dishes, it attracted the attention of the dignitaries and literati in the main city. I think that on the first day of Sun Kengtong's wedding, he invited Fan Kinjao and Han Jingchen to come here. Fan Kinjao thought about it briefly and found that the food here was really good. The two people entered the door, and the waiter came to greet them. Since it was noon and there were not many diners, Yunyu asked the waiter to find a more secluded place. The waiter immediately led the two of them to a corner on the second floor. The location was a bit off, but fortunately there was a full moon window behind them, and the scenery was very good. Yunyu smiled and gestured to Fan Kinjao to order, "Princess, please don't be polite to me." When Fan Kinjao saw Yunyu handing over the menu, he didn't refuse. Thinking about the dishes he had eaten last time, he randomly picked a few dishes: flour-cooked quail, lychee white loin, and 3 crispy soup. Princess Yunyu never thought that Fan Kinjao would really say what he said, and the corners of her lips twitched. She is a good eater. Fan Kinjao had just ordered his food when he heard a familiar voice next door. Originally, the private rooms on the second floor were separated from each other, but because the place where they were sitting was only a small corner, and there was only a bead curtain between them and the private room in front, so people who walked into the private room were stunned. Sitting down, we immediately saw each other clearly and clearly. Fan Kinjao looked at Bailey Rongs and Fan Swinning sitting at the round table not far away, his brows knitted together. Since the end of the new year, Bailey Rongs has been banned by the emperor. Now he can show his face openly. It seems that the emperor has lifted the ban on him. Normally speaking, if the emperor wants to lift the ban on Bailey Rongs, he needs at least an opportunity and a reason. But she had never heard of this matter from Bailey Fengming or her grandfather. No wonder Yunyu came out to her in a good manner. She must have planned this chance encounter. But what if we really meet him? Is it possible that just because of a meal, there will be no gap between them? Princess Yunyu laughed first. "I didn't expect that we were really destined." Bailey Rong seemed a little surprised and stood up quickly. He glanced at Fan Kinjao first and then asked Yunyu, "Why are you here?" Yunyu smiled and said, "Seeing that the weather is nice today, I thought of asking the crown princess to go out for a walk." Bailey Rongs nodded and glanced at Fan Kinjao again. Of course, Fan Kinjao couldn't let Bailey Rongs find fault with her, so he stood up and returned the favor. When he looked back, he caught a glimpse of Fan Swinning standing beside him with pale faces, obviously not happy about this encounter. However, Yunyu only focused on pulling Bailey Rongs to talk, and didn't even care about Fan Swinning beside her. What could Fan Swinning do? She could only stand aside with a stiff face and act as a foil. Fan Kinjao didn't have time to go over and be irritating. After returning the gift, he sat back on the round stool and looked at Fan Swinning while he was bored. Although he was pregnant, his face was not good, and he had lost a few ounces of flesh. I guess it's hard to live with fear after getting pregnant. Who told Fan Swinning to do something shady when Panula was pregnant? Now it's her turn, so she must be worried. Yunyu and Bailey Rongs talked more and more. The waiter was a discerning person, so he simply put the dishes on the two tables together. Yunyu quickly greeted Fan Kinjao with a smile. "It's just fun to sit together." Now in this scene, Fan Kinjao couldn't just turn around and leave. Almost under the watchful eyes of Bailey Rongs and Fan Swinning, she sat on the other side of the round table. Whether it was with Fan Swinning or Princess Yunyu, she remained calm. At a certain distance. It is said that sisters are the most alike. Originally I thought Aunt Fan and the Crown Princess were similar, but now that we are sitting together and looking at each other, I feel that they are a little different. Yunyu smiled and looked at Fan Swinning for a while. He would look at Fan Swinning again. Hearing this, Fan Swinning almost lost her smile. Of course she knows that she is not ugly, but now she has a severe pregnancy reaction, and she is not as delicate as Fan Kinjeo's child. Now sitting with Fan Kinjeo, no matter how straight her back is, and it is obvious that the gap between the two is getting wider and wider. Almost subconsciously, Fan Swinning looked towards Bailey Rongs quietly, and happened to see Bailey Rongs staring at Fan Kinjeo for an instant. Fan Swinning. Fan Kinjeo was in the dream, and he still is like that now. It's not enough to hook up with one prince, now you want to hook up with the third prince. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 705. Chapter 705 Praise to Fan Kinjeo. Bailey Rongs didn't notice Fan Swinning's gaze, he just kept staring at Fan Kinjeo opposite. It was clear that Fan Kinjeo was the one he wanted to choose at the beginning, but in the end, he was intercepted halfway by the prince. It would have been better if the mother and concubine hadn't stopped her in the first place. Since Fan Kinjeo and the prince were together, the prince's career has been smooth. What about him? It's okay not to mention it. Yunyu looked at Bailey Rongs' expression and smiled coldly in her heart. It was indeed the case. We are half-sisters, the similarity is just what we think in our hearts. Fan Kinjeo's face remained calm, but in his heart he was very disgusted with the way Bailey Rongs' eyes fell on his face. He picked up the teacup in front of him and covered half of his face with his sleeves. Yunyu seemed to be stunned for a moment, looked at Fan Kinjeo and asked, "Yes, I remember that the crown princess's biological mother used to be the eldest grandma of the Fan family. What about Aunt Fan's biological mother?" Hearing these words, Fan Swinning's face turned pale instantly. If you get to the bottom of it, her mother's identity cannot withstand scrutiny. Fan Swinning didn't believe that Yunyu really didn't know, but now she said it like this, what was she trying to do? Fan Kinjeo smiled and said, "It happened too long ago, and besides, I was still young at that time, so I basically don't remember much." Yunyu was stunned for a moment, as if she didn't expect Fan Kinjeo to be so ignorant. Of course Fan Kinjeo knew very well that Yunyu wanted to use her hand to slap Fan Swinning in the face. Although the grudge between her and Fan Swinning will never be cleared up, she doesn't have the habit of being a gunman for others. Seeing Fan Kinjeo say this, Bailey Rongs could only look back with a smile. By chance, the food was all served at this time, and everyone picked up their chopsticks. Although the royal family of Ziliang never asked them to be silent during eating and sleeping, talking too much during meals would make them appear uneducated, and the conversation at the table was significantly reduced. Fan Swinning planned to leave quickly after eating, but for some reason, she felt that Bailey Rongs was eating very slowly, much slower than usual. This was nothing. What was even more unacceptable to Fan Swinning was that Bailey Rongs was picking up vegetables and serving soup for her the whole time. He looked like a prince with no airs at all. He held her in the palm of his hand and took good care of her. If it were normal times, Fan Swinning would naturally be happy. But now, Fan Swinning knows that is not the case at all. It wasn't the first day she had dinner with Bailey Rongs. Bailey Rongs was very old-fashioned in continuing the royal tradition. Every time she ate, she had to stand aside to serve the dishes. She could only wait for Bailey Rongs. After Li Rongs finished eating, she could pick up the rice bowl. Why did everything change today? Of course it's because of Fan Kinjeo. Men will only show generosity and consideration in front of the woman they like. Yunyu looked at the scene and felt quite happy. If the third prince's concubine hadn't found her, she wouldn't have known that Bailey Rongs had been blinded by a bitch. Fan Swinning was just a chess piece from the beginning. Logically speaking, things in the palace failed, and this chess piece was useless. Later, when she saw Fan Swinning still beside Bailey Rongs, she didn't pay much attention to it, but what is Bailey Rongs doing now? He is doting on his concubine and destroying his wife? Yunyu naturally cannot let it go. The purpose of bringing Fan Kinjao here today is to let Bailey Rong see her thoughts clearly. Fan Swinning is just a substitute and has no value at all. Fan Kinjao didn't want to see the frowns of the people in front of her, so she just took a few bites and put down her chopsticks. Since I met the third prince, I won't disturb Princess Yunyu and the third prince to reminisce. I'll leave first, Fan Kinjao said, and was about to stand up. Upon seeing this, Yunyu quickly took Fan Kinjao's hand and said, "It's rare to meet, so it's better to sit for a while." Just as Fan Kinjao was about to speak, he saw another person coming upstairs. There were not many people coming, and they were holding a lot of things in their hands. The eyes of Yunyu and Bailey Rongs were also attracted by these people. They were both curious about which high-ranking young master was so wealthy. Looking at the servants holding in their hands, they were all daughters. Household stuff. As a result, a few people were watching enthusiastically and saw those people walking towards this direction in an orderly manner. Yunyu and Bailey Rongs looked at each other with doubts on their faces. At the same time, I saw those people put everything in their hands in the private room, and then walk downstairs. Yunyu stood up quickly and wanted to stop the person. "Are you admitting your mistake?" Before he finished speaking, there were footsteps on the stairs again. As the footsteps became clearer, a familiar figure appeared on the second floor. When Bailey Rong saw the person coming, his expression suddenly changed several times. "Prince." Yunyu didn't expect to see the prince here. She was surprised for a long time before smiling and said, "I didn't expect that His Highness the Prince would also come here to eat. What a coincidence." Bailey Fengming stepped into the elegant room and sat beside Fan Kinjao without any hesitation. Then he looked at Yunyu with a smile and said, "I just saw Princess Yunyu and Ayao on the street. It's not a coincidence." Yunyu was stunned for a moment, unable to react. Since she had seen it a long time ago, why did she show up now? As a result, Bailey Fengming looked at Fan Kinjao and said, "Seeing that you and Princess Yunyu were having a good time shopping, I didn't have the heart to disturb you. However, I bought all the things you like for you. You can look carefully later, see if there's anything missing, and I'll ask someone to buy it." Yunyu. It turns out that these things were all those that Fan Kinjao had just seen, touched, and missed. Bailey Rongs. Is there a limit to showing affection? Fan Swinning. One Bailey Rongs is not enough, now there is an additional prince supporting Fan Kinjao. This is trying to elevate Fan Kinjao to heaven. Fan Kinjao really didn't expect Bailey Fengming to rush over suddenly, but thinking about it, Bailey Fengming is now the spy in this main city, what else does he not know? However, in front of outsiders, Fan Kinjao still had to show a lukewarm attitude. Bailey Fengming didn't mind, and said with a smile, "I have free time today to visit my mother, and my mother also mentioned the scene when you entered the palace last time. Counting it, it has been a while. My mother has received a lot of blessings in the past few days. Edelweiss bird's nest, remember you like to eat it, I asked you to come and sit in the palace when you are free." Fan Swinning's face turned completely pale and she couldn't even hold the chopsticks in her hand. They are also the daughters-in-law of others. Look at Fan Kinjao and then look at her. Even if the queen is just acting on occasion, she is at least willing to maintain a superficial relationship with Fan Kinjao, but her concubine and mother-in-law are too lazy to even do superficial things. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 706. Chapter 706 Bullying My Man? Bailey Rong's face didn't look good either. He didn't know that the prince was so rich. Even if the prince has spare money, he should not be so extravagant and wasteful. Thinking back to the past, among the brothers, the prince was the most impoverished. At that time, the seventh emperor also said that if one day the prince gets spare money, I am afraid that the sun will come out from the west. This may seem like a joke, but it doesn't sound like that. In the past, Bailey Fengming was not taken seriously by the emperor, so he was short of money. Fan Kinjao looked at Bailey Rongs with a heavy look in his eyes. After 2 lifetimes, he was still so disgusting. No matter whether he was a person or a person, he would always do all kinds of despicable things. Bailey Fengming did not show any anger, but looked at Bailey Rongs and smiled. What the third emperor brother said is true, that's why I said Ayao is my blessing. Ever since my father and I decided to marry each other, Ayao was rewarded with many valuable items for his marriage. Yunyu laughed after hearing this. So, this is all the result of the crown princess. It's really a mockery of Bailey Fengming's eating soft rice, don't make it too obvious. Bailey Fengming nodded and smiled. This is natural. Yunyu. Is it unreasonable to eat soft food? Fan Swinning saw that Bailey Rong's expression was not good, so she thought for a while and said, what His Highness the Crown Prince said was too profound. As a woman, I can't understand it. But I do remember that our Third Highness, Shi Chang, said that a real man must stand upright for heaven and earth. You deserve to be born in this world. Fan Kinjao sneered and interrupted, is this the tutor at the third prince's residence? Bailey Rong's face froze. Originally, he thought it was okay for Fan Swinning to help him, but now that he thought about it, it was no longer the case. Fan Kinjao can sit here and talk to them because Fan Kinjao is the future crown princess. To put it bluntly, if the prince really continues to sit in the prince's position smoothly, Fan Kinjao will be the new queen of Ziliang in the future. But what about Fan Swinning? She is just a concubine. Even if she gives birth to a child, she is not worthy of being called mother. Such an identity cannot appear even at banquets of wealthy families, not to mention that Fan Swinning is still criticizing the prince. Fan Swinning gritted her teeth and said, I don't have any other intentions, so why do you need to make a fuss out of a molehill? I don't dare to accept Aunt Fan's name as sister. I haven't seen Aunt Fan call me a word since I was a child, but now she calls me affectionate. Aunt Fan has time to think about having a relationship, so she might as well think more about how to speak. The eldest grandma of the Fan family didn't know how to teach things when she was here, but that doesn't mean Aunt Fan can do whatever she wants with the help of the third prince. At this time, Zy Ling's most shameful life experience was directly put on the table. Fan Swinning's face was completely pale and turned blue, and she was forced to burst into tears. Fan Kinjao looked at Fan Swinning coldly, without any pity. What did Bailey Rong say to Yunyu? As the royal daughter-in-law who had never been married, it was not easy for her to get involved. Anyway, with Bailey Fengming's mind like a sieve, she would not suffer any loss. But no matter what others say, there is no room for Fan Swinning to speak. Does the man who ridiculed her in front of her really think that she is a dead person? Yunyu looked at everyone present, but she was still unsure in her heart. She clearly noticed at the palace banquet last time that her father didn't seem to be optimistic about the harmony between Fan Kinjao and the prince, but she didn't want them to be too unfamiliar on the surface, so she had been observing secretly during this period. Fan Kinjao, even now. She just wanted to see if Fan Kinjao and the prince were really married just because of marriage. However, Yunyu couldn't tell anything from what Fan Kinjao just said. The prince had been quarreling with Bailey Rong since he entered the house. At that time, Fan Kinjao did not speak. On the contrary, Fan Swinning was severely punished by Fan Kinjao when he talked too much. If you analyze this matter carefully, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with it. Even if Fan Kinjao and the prince have no feelings, they will be tied together in the future. If Fan Shuiying slaps the prince in the face as an ant, does Fan Kinjao's face look better? Thinking like this, Yunyu had no intention of speaking again. Since everything is reasonable, she will not stand up for Fan Swinning. At this moment, Lin Yi went upstairs and said, "Your Highness, the Emperor has summoned you to enter the palace quickly to meet the Emperor." Bailey Fengming nodded, and then looked at the other people at the round table. "I wanted to sit for a while longer, but I didn't want to see my father and Zhao. It seems that what the third Emperor brother said is really good. Ayao is me. The blessing." Humbling, he took Fan Qingjiao's hand and walked out without even looking at everyone's faces. Soon, the room became quiet. Of course Yunyu would not argue with Fan Swinning and lower her own worth, but since she was outside, she couldn't really argue with Bailey Wrongs, so she sat for a while and then went out. Fan Swinning looked at Bailey Wrong's darkened face and felt a little guilty. "Your Highness, I..." Bailey Wrongs didn't even look at her. He stood up and said, "I still have something to do, so you can go back by yourself." Fan Shui's vision immediately blurred as she stared at Bailey Wrongs. She is still pregnant. Did she really leave herself here? Just as I was thinking about it, I saw a few boys opening the door. Fan Swinning quickly held back her tears, but she was still a little happy in her heart. "But His Highness asked you to come." The boy who came in was carrying things in the private room and said, "We are from the Hua family. We have received news from His Highness the Crown Prince, and we came here specially to pick up things for my young lady." Fan Swinning. Fan Qingjiao followed Bailey Fengming out of the tea house. Lin Yi had already led the carriage to the door. When was the third prince released from the ban? Fan Qingjiao asked gently while walking in the direction of the carriage with Bailey Fengming. "I just learned the news too." Bailey Fengming held her hand tightly. It was precisely because of this that he specifically inquired about the news in the main city. Unexpectedly, he heard that Yunyu had made an appointment with Fan Qingjiao. Fan Qingjiao frowned. The emperor is not even paying attention to government affairs now, so why would he suddenly think of the banned Bailey Wrongs? "I will send someone to investigate this matter. If nothing happens, I will go back early. I will visit you when I have time." Bailey Fengming smiled and touched the top of her hair. Fan Qingjiao thought that Bailey Fengming would go to the palace to pay an audience, so he nodded and said nothing more. Watching the carriage speed away, Fan Qingjiao waited until the carriage completely disappeared at the end of the street before she cheered up. Unexpectedly, when she turned around, she saw Yunyu standing in front of the restaurant, smiling at her. "Princess." Fan Qingjiao. "It's really a lingering ghost. Is Princess Yunyu going back to the palace?" Fan Qingjiao took the initiative to say with a smile. Since he saw her, it was always hard to pretend to be arrogant. "It is necessary to return to the palace, but I still have to send the crown princess back to the palace safely first." Yunyu came over, took Fan Qingjiao's hand, and looked affectionate as if nothing happened just now. Fan Qingjiao's lips twitched, but she didn't dare bother Princess Yunyu to see her off. But before she could speak, Yunyu said again, "I made the appointment. If I can't see the crown princess return home safely with my own eyes, I will always feel uneasy." Of course Fan Qingjiao didn't believe that Yunyu would have such kind intentions, but after dealing with Yunyu several times, she knew that if Yunyu wanted to do something, she couldn't hide from it. Instead of letting Yunyu do it behind her back, it would be safer to replace the dark ones with the bright ones. "That's enough trouble for Princess Yunyu." Fan Qingjiao stepped onto the carriage. Yunyu smiled and said, "What the princess said is what I should do." End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 707. Chapter 707 Sudden Pursuit. Yunyu's carriage is completely incomparable to Bailey Fengming's. There are only two futons, one a few inches shorter, and there is no soft couch. Because the carriage had not been modified, it was extremely bumpy. There was not even a teapot in the car, so Fan Qingjiao and Yunyu could only sit looking at each other. When she came, Fan Qingjiao was still able to fight with Yunyu Exu, but after what happened to Bailey Wrongs, now when she saw Yunyu's face, she could only think of Bailey Wrongs, and she started to feel sick. I feel sick to my stomach, let alone speaking on my own initiative. Yunyu seemed to be fine, and said to Fan Kinjao with a smile, I didn't expect that the relationship between the Crown Princess and His Highness is so good. It really makes me envious. Of course, Fan Kinjao couldn't let Yunyu find anything about Niduan in him. He said calmly, it's just a marriage according to the decree. His Royal Highness may not want to disappoint the Emperor. But I see that His Royal Highness the Crown Prince really feels sorry for the Crown Princess. Just now, His Royal Highness asked the servants of the Hua family to send all the things he bought back to the mansion in advance, which is enough to show that His Royal Highness is attentive. It's just a matter of opening your mouth, so how can you be sincere? If His Highness the Crown Prince really doesn't have a Crown Princess in his heart, why would he go out of the palace today? Recently, my father has been reorganizing the affairs of the court, and the court has been extremely busy. It's just a coincidence. Yunyu. Is this Fan Kinjao made of iron? No matter how she tried, she just couldn't get in. Fan Kinjao looked at Yunyu, who didn't look very good looking, and smiled coldly in his heart. This guy is really powerful. He was so embarrassed that his toes were digging through the ground just now in the restaurant, but now he can still act like he's fine. Test her. However, after thinking carefully about what Yunyu just said, Fan Kinjao had to think deeply. Has the Emperor reorganized government affairs? In this case, has the Emperor given up on the Linxiu pill? Counting the time, the 3 spirit blood pills should indeed have been taken. The Emperor has been tossing for so long, trapping the Imperial Doctor in the Longian Palace, and posting an Imperial list to look for talented people. In the end, even a little splash is gone. It didn't splash. Fan Kinjao knew that the Emperor would definitely give up, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. The carriage that was running smoothly suddenly accelerated. Facing the sudden rush, both Fan Kinjao and Yunyu were startled. Yunyu raised her voice and shouted, "How do you drive?" Soon, the panicked voice of the little came from outside, "Chi, Princess Yunyu, there is someone chasing behind you, chasing the carriage." Fan Kinjao quickly raised the window and looked out, and saw 2 more carriages speeding behind him. At such a speed, it is clear that the person coming is evil. Suddenly, several men in black leaned their upper bodies out of the car window, holding sticks and other blunt objects in their hands. Fan Kinjao's heart skipped a beat. Now on the carriage, besides her, there was Yunyu, so who was the target of these people? If it was really for her, then Fan Kinjao could not think of anyone except Bailey Rongs. But if Bailey Rongs really wanted her life, did he really not even care about Yunyu's life? In the carriage, Yunyu's face was so pale that her blood was gone. She stretched out her limbs and forced herself into a corner of the carriage to prevent herself from being thrown out by the too fast carriage. Seeing Fan Kinjao retract his gaze, Yunyu asked tremblingly, "Can you see who it is?" Fan Kinjao shook his head. Those people were dressed in night clothes and all wore black gauze on their faces. Their appearance was completely indistinguishable. Yunyu's expression turned even worse when she saw Fan Kinjao shaking his head. Who on earth is so bold? If I catch him, I will let my father kill all 9 of their clans. Fan Kinjao looked at Yunyu's expression carefully. He was probably really frightened. Even his teeth were chattering when he spoke, and tears kept rolling in his eyes. This look really doesn't look like he knows anything in advance. Suppressing the suspicion in his heart, Fan Kinjao struggled and moved towards the car door. While pressing his back against the car door, he asked the little outside, "Are you sure you can get rid of it?" The little eunuch's voice said, also full of fear of danger, "Their carriage is too fast. Those horses should have been trained in advance. I'm afraid it will be difficult for our horses to outrun them." "So you can't get rid of it?" Fan Kinjao's face changed slightly, looking for the car curtain that had been blown up by the strong wind, and looked outside again. The direction of the western suburbs mansion was originally biased, and now the alley where they were was completely empty. Under such circumstances, even if they shouted at the top of their lungs, no one would be able to hear them. At the same time, a wooden stick thicker than an arm was stretched out along the car window. Yunyu was so frightened that she screamed and instinctively hugged her head, but her body lost its support. Seeing Yunyu's body bumping around in the carriage like a ball, Fan Kinjao was lying if she said she was unhappy. After all, she and Yunyu had never been friendly. But Fan Kinjao knows better that now is not the time to laugh. No matter what Yunyu's purpose is in finding her, since she is with Yunyu now, she must not let anything happen to Yunyu under her nose. Otherwise, given concubine Yu's plan, I don't know how to hold on to it. Thinking like this, Fan Kinjao supported the carriage wall with one hand and grabbed Yunyu's body with the other. But just when Fan Kinjao grabbed Yunyu and tried to pull her towards him, a stick was inserted into the car window on the other side again. Fortunately at this moment, the young driving the cart suddenly tightened the horse's rope. The carriage that was speeding suddenly stopped in place. The carriage that had been flanking on both sides seemed not to have expected that Fan Kinjao would suddenly stop. One of them did not react and continued to rush forward. Seeing this, the little quickly turned the horse's head. The speed was so fast that Yunyu, who had no support whatsoever, was thrown directly out of the car window. Yunyu was so scared that she even closed her eyes, and her heart was ready for pain. Suddenly, a pair of arms wrapped around her body. Yunyu opened her eyes in surprise and saw Fan Kinjao rushing over at some point and pulling her into his arms. The two carriages are chasing after them again. Princess Yunyu must catch them and not be thrown out, Fan Kinjao said, holding Yunyu's hand and supporting it on the wall of the nearby carriage. Yunyu looked at Fan Kinjao's face in a daze, her face turned pale with fright like her, but unlike her, Fan Kinjao's black eyes showed no trace of panic or panic. Helpless. Aren't you afraid of death? Yunyu didn't believe that there were really people in this world who were not afraid of death. Fan Kinjao, who was observing the movement outside the car window, frowned slightly when he heard this and said, "Of course I'm afraid." Yunyu sneered in her heart. If she was afraid of death, why bother holding on? It is precisely because of fear that we should work harder to live. If you really only know how to run around and wait for death, it would be better to die in this world. Survival of the fittest will always prevail. Fan Kinjao, after reviving my life, I no longer know how to write about self-sorrow and self-pity. Yunyu stared blankly at Fan Kinjao's eyebrows, and had to swallow the question when it came to her lips. From the time of the accident until now, Fan Kinjao has been analyzing the situation quickly and finding the right opportunity to survive. Yunyu really has nothing to ridicule her like this. If she really laughed at Fan Kinjao, then who is she if she is not even Fan Kinjao? Bang! A loud noise suddenly exploded in the carriage, and the two carriages were caught up again. The heavy sticks smashed into the carriage along the windows, directly breaking the mahogany table into half. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 708. Chapter 708, The First Prince's Rescue. Two carriages attacked the carriage, and countless sticks were inserted into the carriage and smashed everywhere. Yunyu was really frightened. Apart from screaming, her mind was completely blank. Fan Kinjao fixed his body with one hand, and held Yunyu's trembling body with the other hand. Large beads of sweat dripped down his cheeks uncontrollably. Suddenly, the carriage jolted violently. Yunyu, who was completely unprepared, was knocked out and hit the sticks. Although those sticks were blunt weapons, those people hit the carriage with enough strength. If they were really hit by those sticks, even if their lives were not in danger for the time being, there was still a risk of ruptured internal organs. At the critical moment, Fan Kinjao gritted his teeth and rushed towards Yunyu. When Yunyu came to her senses, she saw Fan Kinjao lying on top of her, protecting her tightly. It's true that Fan Kinjao doesn't want to get hurt, and it's even more true that he can't watch Yunyu get hurt. But she was injured and it was her fault that she sustained herself to death, while Yunyu's injury involved too many things. She has seen with her own eyes the sacrifices behind Bailey Fenming's journey to this day, so Fan Kinjao also least wants to see it. Concubine Yu talks about Yunyu's injury, thus affecting Bailey Fenming's hard work and stability. Situation. If he had to choose one of the two, Fan Kinjao would naturally choose the latter without any hesitation. Yunyu certainly knew the reason why Fan Kinjao saved her, but even so, the shock in her eyes only increased. Hong to heart, if the matter were reversed, Yunyu would definitely not have the courage like Fan Kinjao. Hold your head, don't let the back of your head get hurt, Fan Kinjao gritted his teeth and warned. At this moment, Yunyu was surprisingly obedient and quickly hugged her head. Fan Kinjao also lowered his head and buried his cheek in Yunyu's neck. Suddenly, a severe pain came over my back. Even though Fan Kinjao was prepared in advance, his chest was still shaken by pain. But Fan Kinjao was not given any time to buffer, and then another wooden stick hit her on the back. The wooden sticks were struck at random, crackling in the carriage. Fan Kinjao, who was protecting Yunyu in his arms, had no way to dodge. He could only lower his head, using all his strength to protect his head and stay awake. Mind. The sound of horses tearing screams suddenly sounded. The little driving the cart looked at the stick hitting the horse in shock, knowing that the horse was frightened. Immediately afterwards, the carriage began to rush forward uncontrollably. The speed was so fast that the little outside was jolted out of the carriage. Yunyu seemed to feel something, and suddenly asked softly, "Will we die like this?" Fan Kinjao took a long breath to relieve the pain in his back. No. She still had a lot of things to do, so how could she die like this? Yunyu naturally didn't believe what Fan Kinjao said. The carriage was out of control at all. If it continued to gallop like this. Suddenly, the carriage trembled violently again. Yunyu and Fan Kinjao in the carriage were bounced up and fell heavily into the carriage. Through the rolled-up car curtains, Fan Kinjao saw a figure suddenly coming from a distance in the opposite direction. The eldest prince. The eldest prince did not expect to see such a horrifying scene. Seeing that the horse had gone completely crazy and rushed towards him, he did not hesitate at all and put the wooden wheel cart under him across the carriage and the carriage. Among the horses. While the carriage slowed down, the eldest prince hung on the shaft of the carriage with all his strength, and untied the ropes between the horses and the carriage as quickly as possible. Finally, as the horse rushed out of the alley, the horse rope slowly fell to the ground. The eldest prince was thrown to the ground, but before he could breathe a sigh of relief, he saw that the already shaky carriage had completely lost its balance and was tilting towards the opposite side of him. Fan Kinjao in the carriage seized the opportunity and pushed Yunyu out of the window while the carriage crashed to the ground. Boom dash. With a loud noise, the carriage hit the ground heavily. The eldest prince was stunned. It took him a long time to react and shouted, "Crown Princess! Crown Princess!" The little who was thrown away from the carriage in advance ran over in a hurry and was frightened when he saw this scene. If something really happened to the Crown Princess, would he still be alive? "What are you still doing? Hurry up and call for help," the eldest prince angrily scolded. The little came to his senses immediately and ran towards the street outside the alley. When Yunyu came back to her senses, she saw the eldest prince dragging his naturally disabled legs, leaning on the ground with his elbows, and trying his best to squirm in the direction of the carriage. Who is the eldest prince? How come Princess Yunyu doesn't know him? Since his legs were disabled since he was a child, he wished he could think that the whole world owed him. I remember that when she was a child, she fell down in the imperial garden, and the eldest prince pushed the wooden cart past her indifferently, without even looking at her. But what is such a selfish person doing now? Saving Fan Kinjao. Compared with the other princes, the eldest prince is the most pampered one. He has never experienced such hardship before. In just a moment, his elbows were bruised. But now he didn't care about the pain at all, he just wanted to rescue Fan Kinjao, who was smashed inside first. It's just that the carriage collapsed and was shattered into pieces. It was simply not something he could do alone. Turning back and seeing Yunyu sitting in a daze, the eldest prince had never been so tough as he is now. How long do you want to sit there and rest, and why don't you come over and help me? Yunyu bit her lip and said, with you and me, there's no way we can push that carriage away. The eldest prince angrily said, don't forget who saved you. If the crown princess hadn't pushed you out of the car window in time, it would not only be the crown princess who was smashed inside now, but also you. Yunyu's face turned red after being scolded by the eldest prince, and she could only stand up reluctantly. Just at this time, the little also came back, followed by merchants from nearby streets. Many of them were rented from the shopkeepers of Huajia shop. When they heard that something happened to the crown princess, they ran over with their own assistants. The eldest prince knew that even if he tried to get closer at this moment, it would be a waste of time, so he simply gave instructions from the side. In almost a cup of tea, the broken carriage was finally moved away. Fan Kinjao, who has been immersed in darkness, always maintains a trace of consciousness. Sensing the incoming light, she faintly opened her eyes. When she saw that Yunyu was not seriously injured, she relaxed and fainted. Yunyu originally wanted an excuse to leave, but in the end, Fan Kinjao's look froze her in place. Aware of the unkind gazes of the people around her, Yunyu felt that if she just threw her hands away and walked away, these people's spit would drown her. Looking at Fan Kinjao, who was unconscious on the ground, Yunyu could only accept her fate and carry him on her back. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 709. Chapter 709. I'm afraid it's going to be too deep. The nearby merchants all have their own carriages, so there is no need for Yunyu to carry Fan Kinjao all the way back. As Yunyu and the eldest prince accompanied Fan Kinjao on the carriage, the merchants who rented the Hua family had already sent people to report the news to the Hua family. When the carriage stopped outside the door of the western suburbs mansion, all the daughters-in-law of the Hua family were waiting on the steps. Seeing Fan Kinjao being carried down by Yunyu, the daughters-in-law were so frightened that their legs went weak. They quickly picked up Fan Kinjao and rushed into the house in a hurry. Where is the old lady? When I get back to second grandma, the old lady is already waiting in the yard of the young lady. Kyozeo, why are you here? It's inconvenient for you to have a bloated stomach. Go back quickly. But I'm worried about Kinjao. I won't worry if I don't watch her wake up. The Hua family went all the way to the house, noisy all the way. Yunyu sat in the carriage and watched silently. She didn't want to admit it, but she had to admit that she envied Fan Kinjao at this moment. So what if she grew up in the royal family? In the eyes of outsiders, she has a distinguished status, but only she knows in her heart that she has never felt such family affection. Don't look at it. Those things don't belong to you anymore. The eldest prince leaned on the soft platform and said softly. Yunyu glanced at him. Don't you think the eldest prince is envious? The eldest prince chuckled. Envy? Do you think these all belong to the crown princess? Yunyu was stunned for a moment. It's true that Fan Kinjao has the blood of the Hua family, but don't forget that her surname is Fan. It's not easy for foreigners like this to get the blessing of the opposite sex. You just saw that I pay so much attention to the crown princess, but I don't know how much the crown princess has put in to get to where she is now. When the eldest prince recalled the scene where the crown princess had forced herself to go to the palace for a boy from the Hua family, the corners of her lips twitched again and again. This kind of thing happened again and again. Not everyone can do it. Yunyu was too lazy to continue listening to Fan Kinjao's past. Where is the eldest prince going? The eldest prince spread his hands and said, of course he has to go to the palace if such a big thing happens. Why don't we go home and take a nap? Yunyu. When I just saved Fan Kinjao, why didn't I see you being so venomous? At this time, the mansion in the western suburbs had already exploded. The scene when Fan Kinjao was carried back last time is still vivid in my mind. How can the Hua family not be afraid now? It was Ji Hongliao who was sitting in the flower hall drinking tea. He got a letter from his son and knew that the two young children were going to get married quietly outside. He came to visit as an in-law. As a result, he saw that the Hua family suddenly became busy. Figure. Seeing Ningguan running past, Ji Hongliao quickly stopped him and said, what happened? Everyone in your house is on fire. Ninghan thought that Ji Yuanjian was her young lady's master and Miss Tianyu's future father-in-law. He was not an outsider, so she didn't hide it. Something happened to our young lady. She is injured now. Our old lady, hey, where are you going? Before Ningguan could finish her words, she saw that everyone from Ji Hongliao had already walked out of the flower pavilion. What else can I do? Of course it's up to your young lady, Ji Hongliao said without looking back. But you didn't bring a medicine kit. What kind of medicine kit do you need at your Hua's house? The most important thing your Hua's house lacks is medical supplies. Go quickly, don't waste time. She has to live well. If I have anything, I still expect her to be filial to me. Ningguan. Looking at how fast you are walking, with your physical fitness, you will have no problem living for another few decades. In the room, Tao Yuxian was treating Fan Kinjao's back injury. Ji Hongliao simply waited outside. After Tao Yuxian had taken care of it, he entered the door, sat down on the bed and hurriedly he raised his hand and pressed it on Fan Kinjao's wrist. He waited until he noticed that Fan Kinjao's pulse was stable, then he breathed a sigh of relief. This girl can do anything. Tao Yuxian sighed, I originally planned to let you come and have a good meal, but in the end, I made you worry again. Ji Hongliao waved his hand, do you know what the reason is? I don't know the details yet. The master has already entered the palace. We have to wait for the news from inside the palace. Just don't get involved too deeply. Tao Yuxian is a smart man, as long as he can pull the carriage. Horses have been trained by horse dealers since childhood, and the chance of being frightened is extremely small. Although the person who came to deliver the message insisted that the horse was frightened, she was still worried about it. Now that the prince is in the limelight, who knows what the third prince will do? But once this matter involves the royal family, I'm afraid the emperor may not be able to give an explanation to the Hua family. Don't be afraid even if it really involves something that shouldn't be involved. The queen is still here to take charge. Ji Hongliao didn't believe that the queen's protective character would allow people to rub sand in their eyes. Taking a step back, this matter really put the queen's hands at a loss. Didn't she also have the prince? Ji Hongliao's lips couldn't help twitching when he thought of the prince's sieve-like mind. With the prince's methods, even if he really couldn't let the thief lose a piece of his flesh openly, he could still let him go secretly. Kilograms of blood. Anyway, his apprentice will never suffer any loss. At the same time, there was a commotion in the palace. The eldest prince and Yunyu drove directly to the palace gate in a carriage. Yunyu looked at the eldest prince's embarrassed appearance and suggested, why don't the eldest prince follow me to Yueyu Palace to change clothes first? There are still many clothes of the third prince in the mother's palace. Princess Yunyu doesn't need to worry about it. The eldest prince waved his hand, and then called for a guard to carry him, and he went to the imperial study room covered in dirt. Yunyu looked at the embarrassed back of the eldest prince and frowned in worry. If the eldest prince was really allowed to cause trouble in front of his father, Fan Kinjao's risking his life to save her would definitely be known to everyone. What will she do next? Do you really want to return the favor to Fan Kinjao? Of course Yunyu would not and did not want to return it, but she did not want others to poke her spine from behind. After thinking about it carefully, she called a guard and ordered, "Go to Lu Renfei quickly and say no matter what, we must stop the eldest prince from meeting his father." When concubine Lu Ren got the news, she was shocked and hurriedly led the people out. In front of the courtyard of the imperial study room, the panting Lu Renfei finally blocked the eldest prince. "Where are you going?" The eldest prince did not expect that his mother-in-law would suddenly come over, but after thinking about it, he sneered, "Yunyu is a smart person and knows how to find his mother-in-law to block my way." Concubine Lu Ren glanced at the guard who was carrying the eldest prince and knew that this was not the place to talk. "Looking at the injuries on your body, you must be obedient and go back with your mother to take care of the wounds first." End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 710. Chapter 710, Who is the third prince in front of the prince? As Lu Renfei spoke, she motioned to the palace attendants behind her to pick up the eldest prince. Unexpectedly, the eldest prince slapped the most shameless in front of Lu Renfei on the face. The sound of "pa" stunned Lu Renfei. "What are you going to do?" Lu Renfei asked, suppressing her anger. "Can't my mother really see what I want to do?" Today the crown princess risked her life to save Yunyu. No matter what the crown princess's purpose was, it is true that Yunyu accepted the grace of saving her life. "Now Yunyu, you asked the concubine to come and stop me, didn't she just want me to shut up and write off the matter of the crown princess saving her?" The eldest prince knew that the third prince was cruel, but he didn't expect Yunyu to be even worse than him. As expected, they were both born from the same mother's womb, and they were both equally cold-blooded and selfish. Lu Renfei's hands were shaking with anger. "You're crazy. If these words reach concubine Yu's ears, everything I have done for you will be in vain." The eldest prince didn't care at all. Hasn't the mother-in-law noticed it yet? What do you see? If the third prince really values friendship, how could he watch his son being demoted to a commoner and ignore him? The emperor was very angry at that time, so what if the third prince wants to help? So, the third prince just turns a blind eye to me and doesn't care whether I live or die. Lu Renfei gritted her teeth and said, "Then what did the prince do to deserve your desperate efforts?" The eldest prince smiled bitterly, and only he knew the feeling. "If there had been no crown princess, I would have been dead long ago." He did not expect that when he was giving up on himself, it would be Fan Qinjiao who would give him a hand. He will always remember standing outside the window and looking at Fan Qinjiao standing inside, protecting his unborn child without any calculation. Perhaps there is really hope, and now even his relationship with Yan Hanbei has eased a lot. With such a disability, no matter how hard he fought, he would never get the chair. His desperate calculation was just to hope that his life would be easier when the new emperor came to the throne. He was blind at the beginning and believed the lies of the third prince. Fortunately, he woke up not too late. Now he can be regarded as someone who has one foot on the prince's boat. If he wants to let himself and his children live in the future, feeling comfortable, now it is natural to rush forward without hesitation. After experiencing so much, can't my mother and concubine still see who is more trustworthy? The eldest prince did not want to get entangled with his mother and concubine anymore, and he still had more emotions left to meet his father. Concubine Lu Ren grabbed the eldest prince's wrist and lowered her voice and said, "Concubine Yu has been favored for so many years, and even now she is still favored from time to time. The third prince has always been favored by the emperor, so what does that prince have? The eldest prince." He had thought so before, but reality slapped him hard in the face. In the eyes of others, the prince really has nothing, but such an ordinary prince is an existence that no one has shaken in these years, even the empress. No matter how favored concubine Yu is, she will sit in the back. The queen is the queen, the crown prince's concubine. The eldest prince suddenly smiled when he thought about all that had happened. To put it more bluntly, What kind of thing is the third emperor's younger brother in front of the crown prince? Lu Renfei's eyes widened instantly, and she was obviously very stimulated. Is her son crazy? The eldest prince was too lazy to bother and signaled the guards to continue moving forward. Who is crazy will be answered soon. As the eldest prince entered the imperial study, soon word spread in the palace that the princess was in danger. In Fenji Palace, Queen Zhengzi got up and was about to walk out. Lily was so frightened that she quickly followed her. Queen, what are you trying to do? What to do? Of course I went to cry in front of the emperor. Queen Zhen 11 kept walking. As the saying goes, children who cry have milk to drink. They always have to cry before the emperor will take this matter seriously. Stand up. Queen, please calm down, the emperor will definitely investigate this matter. Do you really think she is 3 years old and easy to fool? In the main city, at the feet of the emperor, which bandit is so impatient that he dares to come here to cause trouble and become a target? The Queen's Empress means. Queen Zhen 11 smiled coldly, no matter who it is, as long as it hurts me, it won't do. Now that the storm is in full swing, those who have done something wrong will have to keep their heads down. When the storm calms down, they will probably find a way to calm the matter down with the emperor as soon as possible. How could Queen Zhengzi give those people this opportunity? If you want to wait for the news to subside, I must rush ahead of you and let the emperor order a strict investigation. In the imperial study, Emperor Yongchang had just seen off the prince and the eldest prince when he saw Baitu running in a hurry again. Your Majesty, the Queen has arrived. She is crying outside the door right now. Emperor Yongchang. Crying in broad daylight is really unlucky. Let her in. Yes, Your Majesty. Empress Zhengzi really cried. Even though she was standing in the imperial study room, her tears kept falling. Emperor Yongchang's head hurt from the Queen's crying. Didn't you say that the person is not dead yet? Is the Queen making a fuss out of a molehill now? Queen Zhen 11 pretended not to hear the impatience in the Queen's mouth, and choked. I know that the Emperor feels sorry for me, and I am afraid that I will break down from crying and be unable to continue to uphold justice in the harem. But now I am like this even before my daughter-in-law gets married. Those thieves are so rampant. If this matter is really spread, I am afraid that anyone will step on my concubine's head in the future. Emperor Yongchang hesitated for a moment, but did not deny the Queen's words. Thinking about it more carefully, if Fan Qingjao really has the root cause of his illness, who can he find to monitor the prince's actions all the time? Moreover, what the Queen said is right. Fan Qingjao is the daughter-in-law of the royal family. Even though she has not married yet, she is also favored by the royal family. If it is really taken care of now, will the Queen be the only one who is embarrassed? Even he, the emperor, and even the entire royal family, may lose face. Who do you think is more appropriate for the Queen to investigate this matter? Emperor Yongchang asked without revealing his expression. Old scumbag, he still doesn't forget to dig a hole for her even now. The corners of Queen Zhen 11's eyes were still very red, and she seemed a little embarrassed after hearing these words. I don't understand the arrangements in the court. Doesn't it make it difficult for my concubine to ask such a question? Emperor Yongchang seemed to say casually, then leave it to the prince. Queen Zhen 11 frowned. I think it is not appropriate for the prince to intervene. Emperor Yongchang's dark eyes were immediately fixed on the Queen's face, and he asked probingly, didn't you just say that the Queen didn't understand the arrangements in the court? End of this chapter.